Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Adam Levine, and I'm the Executive Director here at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, or NYMTC. As the Downstate Region's Metropolitan Planning Organization, NYMTC provides a collaborative planning forum to address transportation-related issues and develop regional plans through our members' shared vision for the transportation network that connects New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. Thank you all for participating in today's Brown Bag webinar. Please note that this webinar is eligible for one certification maintenance credit from the American Planning Association. You will find more information about this in the chat. Today, we will hear from Tanvi Pandya, who is the Executive Director of Design, Build, and Emergency Contracts within the Division of Bridges at the New York City Department of Transportation. Tanvi's focus is on the department's most significant effort, the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, or BQE, program, developing design concepts that include fixing the busy highway and other significant improvements to surrounding neighborhoods. This is all part of New York City DOT's vision for long-term and streamlined redesign of the BQE for the 21st century. Tanvi will provide an overview of the Weigh in Motion program being used for the BQE. This technology reveals the extent to which overweight vehicles contribute to premature structural wear and is used as an automated overweight vehicle enforcement and structural preservation strategy. There will be an opportunity for questions following the presentation, so please type your questions into the WebEx chat box and we will address them during the question and answer portion towards the end of today's presentation. I also ask that you let us know via the chat who you are and where you're joining us from. This helps us learn more about our audience. Before I turn the microphone over to Tanvi, I'll just add a brief note. Please stay tuned for upcoming Brown Bag webinars early in the new year, as well as our annual in-person NYMTC Council meeting in late February. Details on all of these will be coming soon. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to Tanvi for her presentation. Tanvi?
Hello, good noon, everybody. I will go over our presentation. It's definitely something that we are very happy to have accomplished here at New York City DOT. It is a broader conversation, and so I'm going to kind of make BQE the test case, but it really does address the broader issue of overweight vehicles and protecting our infrastructure. So there we go. So this is basically the main 4 points that we'll walk through, right? What was the challenge that we were up against using BQE as the example, how the implementation of direct enforcement worked out, where we are currently and where we're headed. Obviously not a one-person team at all. Several people here at City DOT within my group working on it. Don Harrison, Shane Trotman, as well as our collaboration with Rutgers, with Professor Hani Nassif, Chekuk and Pong, as well as Kistler, who is the vendor for our systems and worked pretty closely with us and the design team that we were working with. So here's the issue, right? And this is obviously not just City DOT, it's every agency that owns infrastructure. Most of our infrastructure was built after the 40s, 50s, in that time frame, all of the major highways. And so we're all up against the same tight timeline. All of these structures are coming towards the end of their service life, and we're trying to juggle everything that we need to do. And, you know, when will we have funds? How many projects can we handle at a time? And what's the best way to address them? Do we do rehab? Do we do replacement? So all of us at the agency levels, we're all doing this math and trying to figure things out. At the same time, we're also being pushed to see what we can do to improve safety on our roadways and what are the sustainable ways to do things, right? So the longer we can keep a structure in service, the less construction activities we have to do. Obviously, that's better for everyone involved. So to that end, BQE became sort of the poster child, even though that's not where we were headed at the time. It just sort of fell into place. So for those of you who are not local to New York City, if you look on the map over here, the little blue circle is the portion of the BQE that we're talking about. And you can see from the highways as they're laid out that this is the only interstate that goes through Staten Island, Brooklyn and Queens into Bronx, right? So this is the major thoroughfare for all of the major freight movements for the city. It is a very unique structure, as you can see. It's a cantilevered, all concrete, tucked into the hillside of Brooklyn Heights for this portion. And so that makes it very difficult to maintain because of the unique structural setup of this. It does get a lot of truck traffic, about 130,000 vehicles a day with about 13,000 trucks and, constant movement on this road. So we have maybe 2, 3 hours where we can close a lane and we won't cause a backup per night. Daytime is impossible. So it's a very challenging site. So this is the way it was built. Like literally the wall was built and then this cantilevers come out of it. So this is a pretty neat photo of the construction. Excuse me. And at the time, this is the design load. Back in 1940s, trucks were a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, and then the concrete and steel had certain capacities per design code of the time. We took on this project that is the city DOT in 2013, 14, that time frame. My personal involvement began in 2016 when I came to the city DOT to figure out what to do with this structure and where to take it into the future. And obviously, the first thing we wanted to do is really understand the condition of the structure. So we did in-depth inspections, had load ratings done at the time. We did a lot of non-destructive testing to understand the condition of the structure. And that has kind of continued over the years, variety of different tests occurring at different times. But as typical engineering effort tends to be focused towards the capacity side of the equation, right? So to understand how long a structure can be kept in service, there's two parameters. What is the demand on the structure and what is the capacity of the structure? And you always want the demand to be less than the capacity, right? So the capacity is a pretty typical analysis that we do quite frequently. On the demand side, though, information can often be a little bit dependent on code rather than reality, right? So there are AASHTO codes that we follow that tell us what analysis to do and so on. And AASHTO codes assume, I don't want to say assume, they had done analysis of trucks at certain point in time, and that told them what truck weights to use in design. So those exist. But there's another assumption that's made in that equation, which is there is enforcement of truck weight limits happening on the roadways so that that assumed truck capacity is not being exceeded. But we don't know that. We know from anecdotal information that Northeast tends to have a lot of overweight vehicles. We also know that it's really, really difficult to enforce truck weights when you are on a very narrow roadway. So that led us to a question of what is the actual load on this structure? We cannot just assume that we are safe as long as we follow the codes. We wanted to be more proactive than that. So during this time, we were working closely with C2 Smart and Professor Hani Nassif in particular with the mayor's expert panel. And he had a grant to test various WIM sensors and do an analysis of what sensors are, have a long service life and whatnot. So we created a test bed for him on the BQE so we could collect data on our site and get an understanding of the loads on our roadway. So all 6 lanes had sensors in it, and that was in 2019 that we installed this system. What that told us was kind of very much along the lines of what we anticipated, right? That out of the trucks that are on the road, 10 to 12% of the trucks, so right? So there's 130,000 vehicles, about 13,000 of 12 to 13,000 of those per day are trucks. Out of that, about 10 to 12% are overweight. If you look at that bar of overweight and then further look at how many of them are just a little bit overweight and how many are like really overweight, this is the breakdown we get, that we were getting about 40% that were in that range of 80 to 85,000 pounds, which is not, for structural purposes, is not a big deal. That much safety factor we have. But then when you look at that, the remaining overweights, that's over 90,000, that's this gray, yellow range. We're talking about 20% of those overweights were severely overweight. That really piqued our attention. And the reason that matters is there's such a thing as load rating and load factors, right? So when we're trying to kind of simplify this understanding of what is the capacity of the structure, how long can we continue to carry the current traffic, we do what's called a load rating. In that load rating, there has to be some factors of safety we apply to the capacity side as well as the demand side. So by code, that capacity side is supposed to be 1.75 for inventory operating. This kind of gets technical, but there's these factors. But the code also says that if you know what are the actual traffic conditions on your roadway, then you can take that into account and calculate what your site-specific load factor should be. So using the data that we had collected from that test bed, we had Professor Honey and his team calculate the site-specific load factors for us. And in that site-specific load factor calculation, those extreme overweights really play a big role. And so because we had such a high number of high overweights, that changed our number. So we couldn't rely on a 1.75 number. We had to go to 2.13. That's over 20% increase that we had to account for in the Staten Island bound direction and over 30% for the Queens bound. That's a pretty significant difference. And so that led us to then make our case to the mayor's office and others that, this is a problem. We cannot have this level of overweight and assume that we're going to get a certain service life. There's going to be a problem here. We need to somehow find a way to do enforcement. So the mayor at the time issued the executive order that at a minimum, there should be no permit vehicles going over. So in the city, we issue overweight permits, and there's grandfather permits and all kinds of processes for certain loads to get through the city. And so as a first cut, we told all of those permit vehicle folks, and by the way, in the city, the permits are issued by Bridges Division. We have a truck unit that does that. So we explain, we put out a notification to all of them, no permit vehicles on BQE for this stretch. And then in addition, PD was deployed to really try to pull traffic off and if we've identified anything overweight, PD was trying to stay on top of it. But if you think about the roadway, it's 11-foot lanes, no shoulders. So they would have to take them off the roadway to a flat spot and then use portable scales. So even when we were proactively identifying overweight trucks for them, it would take them up to 2 hours to test one truck. So while the system was calling out these yellow bars that you see, much bigger number of overweights, PD was only able to handle a few trucks at a time. So logistics did not allow real enforcement to occur on this site. So that gave us additional impetus to make the case for direct enforcement using WIM. By this point, obviously, the system has been out there for a while. We've tested it over and over, so we had a sense of how the accuracy is staying over time and what is the band that we're in with the error. So we felt somewhat comfortable saying that we can achieve this 10% number comfortably. So we, at that point, again, we had a lot of attention from electeds at the time. So we were able to get legislative support to get this legislation done. This is a first of its kind in the US, where we said we can use WIM to directly enforce the legal weight limits. If you are 10% over the limit based on your bridge formula, which admittedly has been a little bit difficult to get across to all of the freight industry because trucks are used to that 80,000 pounds number, instead of recognizing that if you have a smaller truck, you don't get 80,000, you might get 54 or some other number. and then also the axle and tandem weight. And the legislation requires us to have 2 independent weights taken. So we have 2 systems that measure each vehicle. So that was passed in 2021, and then in 23 we made some minor adjustments to it. While all that was going on, obviously, once the legislation passed in 2021, by 2022 October, we had finished the installation of the first system. This is just kind of a graphic to show how the system is organized. We in the city already do automated camera-based enforcement, so we had pretty good background on that end of things. So the WIM side had to come in. We had C2 Smart supporting us in some of that effort as well. And then while the construction was going on, we had our back end being built out by our in-house IT so that we could actually identify the violations, do the reviews, and process it. So why is this a big thing? Because if we were already doing camera-based and WIM has been around forever, what's the big deal? The big deal was tying all of this together, not just for enforcement. And while today's conversation is not doing the deep dive on it, we're also taking that information into truly monitoring the structure and understanding where it's going to, where we need to intervene in the long run, taking the material testing and all of that. So we have a paper on that. That's a whole separate topic. But purely for the purposes of this conversation, the integration of WIM with the camera-based enforcement is a big change, right? So now you have 24/7 enforcement. We don't need so many personnel. It happens during the daytime. We get the packages uploaded of the violations overnight. Our team comes in next morning, reviews everything, and we're able to issue those violations, right? So this is much more streamlined and an ongoing process. This is a big movement forward in terms of enforcement for weights. So in our particular case, obviously, we needed to make sure it is something that can handle the traffic. So again, those of you know BQE, sometimes it's stop and go, sometimes people are flying. So we needed a system that can handle both of those. We also have to get the axle weights. We have to get 2 separate weights. And then the legislation requires that every 6 months, we need to get certified. So any enforcement equipment that is used, so whether it's the radar gun or the portable scales that the PD uses, all of those have to be certified for their accuracy, right? So if someone's giving you a violation, you want to make sure that that equipment can actually accurately measure whatever it is that it's measuring. So that is typically done by Department of Agriculture. They have inspectors that go test all of this equipment. And so we have to do that with them every 6 months, which led us to another detour, parallel tour of figuring out what are the requirements for these kinds of systems, what are the testing protocols, what should be the system capabilities, how should the testing occur, what are the logistics of doing the test, and so on. So in the US, the Department of Ag typically uses NIST Handbook 44. Every equipment that they test, the testing protocol is written in this Handbook 44. And for those of you who are working at agencies, at DOTs, or in policy, please pay attention because there's going to be an ask tied to this to you at the end of the conversation here today. So that's the handbook they rely on. That currently does not address anything about direct enforcement using WIM. The other alternative is the ASTM. ASTM standards also do not refer to direct enforcement. The next out is the international code. So OIML, which is the European code, does have a pretty good detail standard, but it's not directly applicable to US. So we began the effort to get the Handbook 44 updated as of 2022. And most of our standard is based off OIML, but done in a format that's more typical for NIST Handbook 44. And we've collaborated with a lot of people to try to keep that moving. But it's been a long push for that. In the meantime, Department of Ag, in their role as this inspection team, have the authority to engage with pilots or new technology and develop their own testing protocol, because the handbook, as we know, takes a while to get approved. So each state, the director has the ability to engage and figure out what would be the appropriate testing protocol. So using the protocol that we were trying to get adopted in NIST handbook, we worked on an MOA with Department of Ag. And so they are doing the certification of our system using that protocol that is under discussion nationally currently. So once we get that certification from them, is when we could go live. So uh, once we got that back end all built out in 22 into 23, we began the 90-day warning period in August of 2023 for one direction, which is a Queens-bound direction. And you can see the numbers just from warning. There was no money or anything tied to it. The numbers dropped pretty quickly when people began to recognize that this is for real. And then at the end of those 90 days, within that time frame, we also got certified. So we had Department of Ag come down here. They observed all of the testing. And once they issued the certification and the 90 days were over, we went live. During this time, we met with freight industry associations and whatnot and try to educate them on how the system works. We worked with our Department of Finance and the adjudicating judges, so they understood our system and so on. And this is what the violation generally looks like. So in November 2023, it was Queens bound that went live. And then this past summer, Staten Island bound system also went live. So each vehicle can get up to 2 violations, one for gross vehicle and one for axle or tandem. So there could be up to 2 violations. Each one is $650. Each violation package gets reviewed by somebody at City DOT. They look to make sure that the pictures are clear, that the license plate is visible. If it's a drop axle type truck, was the axle up or down so that the axle count is not wrong, all those kinds of things. And, certain other protocols. And once that is done, then the violation is issued. And it has both weights provided so that it's clear why they got the violation and the type of violation they received. So it has a date and time, the license plate, the gross vehicle weight, what is allowed by bridge formula so that they know what was the number against which they were found to be overweight. We also take a tiny clip of the video as the vehicle passes over. So that clip is saved on a website that we provide a link to so that they can go view and confirm that it is, their vehicle that traveled at that time. And then similarly for the axle weight, it goes to the owner of the license plate. So whoever is the registered owner of the license plate, obviously, if it's a rental and all this other stuff, then the companies have their own protocols on how to handle that. And so the change in behavior was pretty obvious, pretty quick. So since our system was live before we started issuing violations, you could see that the over 80,000 pound type vehicles were in, on an average, this is daily, close to 150 to 200, depending on the time of the year, right? In the summer months, we typically get more overweights. Colder months, construction cools off, things seem to drop off a bit. And you could see the numbers were, upwards of 175. And then as soon as we went live, it dropped into 60. So came down pretty quick. And then what's more important is the ones that we were issuing the violation to. So if you look at it, which is the 10% overweight category, it went from 60 plus minus a day down to 10, 11, 12 a day. And that's about where they have stayed since. Now, one of the things that is important to note is for the Queens-bound direction, there are alternates. People could take a different route. But given that our goal was to protect this particular structure, our goal was met. And so if we look in the longer term run, so now we have, a couple of years worth of data, that trend has kind of stayed there, right? So from the highs from pre-violation time, it has stayed in that 50-60% drop range, and particularly for the over 80,000 pounds. While the total number of trucks has not gone down. So we're still seeing the same traffic. It's just not as overweight as it used to be. And where that really matters is, again, going back to that conversation we had about the factors that apply to calculate the demand on the structure. So now when we did a site-specific number, it came back down closer to what the codes require, which means we're in that range of what the courts expect. And so we have a more predictable understanding of the structure rather than what we were looking at before. So why all of this conversation matters is really that, and I think those of you who have heard me speak before will know that I am a proponent of being proactive as engineers and speaking up when we have things we could do that may not be strictly in our box that we think we should be playing in. Sometimes we have to look beyond. And this was a case where we were asking for a legislative authority for something that hadn't been done in the US before, which meant we had to help write the legislation. We had to help come up with all of the protocols that went with it. We went to this NIST handbook. We're working with ASTM. We worked with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance to get them on board with what we were talking about. We've been talking to freight and trucking industry. We've been explaining these things to elected officials. And on top of that, trying to reach out to all of these other transportation agencies to to make this mainstream, because we don't think that the demand part of the equation should be just left to policy or businesses or whatever, right? If we are responsible for the structures, then we need to have a role in that conversation and be clear about what are the limitations of the structure. So that conversation has obviously been fruitful for this area. Since this year, we got an expansion of the authority. So there are additional agencies that are going to now implement WIM also. In addition to that, City DOT also got legislation to implement WIM at more sites. We continue to obviously work with freight industry to figure out how to make things work better for everyone. And we're working with FHWA and the industry and a lot of others to try to get this NIST handbook updated so that there is one standard across the country and not have a bunch of different standards. Now, for all of you who are on the policy sides or work at DOTs at various states, directly to you all, we need support from every state to get this done. Because the way it works for this Department of Agriculture NIST handbook to be updated, every state needs to vote. 27 out of 50 states have to vote in favor of getting this standard updated and into the handbook. And what we've been doing is going around the country trying to build that support. And what ends up happening is the voting is done by Department of Agriculture. Enforcement is done by Highway Safety or PD or whatever. And DOTs are the ones who are maybe running the WIM if it exists. And those who are running it within their traffic group, not in the bridge group necessarily. So there's a lot of broken telephones happening in every state. And what we need is, because when I speak to other bridge folks, they all say from every state, yes, we would love to have enforcement. But then they need to go convey that to their Department of Ag and say, please vote yes. So what I'm asking all of you is, please get in touch with your policymakers higher up the chain. Get us the support to get this standard. Now, your state, your region may or may not do this on a broad scale. You might have a single structure that needs some extra TLC, and maybe it's only there that you want to use it, whatever it is, or you just want the option for someday to do it. We need a standard that is national. And so we really need people who are paying attention to understand this. Feel free to reach out if you're from a state DOT or some other policy maker and we can give you more information, but we really need support to get this voted in. That's our main goal right now. We also have started working on the ASTM standard to try that, to get that updated. And we want to have that broader conversation around this combined approach, right? It's not just about capacity. We cannot just keep looking at the structural condition. We need to look at demand, and we need to make this longer term investment and conversation. There's research to be done. There is all kinds of policy discussions to be had. And one of the things that we have to remember is the codes, ASTO and all of those, are done based on most common types of structures. So anytime you have a structure that is not as common, or some other condition around the structure that's not typical, then we need to be a little bit more careful in just assuming that whatever is okay by code, we must be okay. We have to have a risk-based and a reliability-based thinking in those areas. So, this goes across the board, right? It's not just BQE. We have these kinds of corridors everywhere. We need to look at it more thoughtfully. We know these are regional mobility and major economic functions, so we have to be thoughtful about that. And weight limit is absolutely necessary for structural preservation. So with that, thank you very much for all of your attention. Again, if you are in that policy DOT world, and New York, New Jersey is very supportive, but if you're from somewhere else, please reach out. We can hopefully get something figured out to get some more votes.
Thank you, Tommy. That was great. I've got a few questions of my own, but I think we've got a few in the chat, so I'll ask Stephanie Brooks to see if do we have a few?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I'll start out. Our first question that came in, we asked about the violations. Are these violations tied back to points on license with the DMV, or if it's like the red light or speeding cameras, the only enforcement is a financial penalty?
Currently, it is only a financial penalty. Can't say what it'll be in the future, but that's where it is right now.
Great. Then
That could
another
be
question.
challenging. I'm just sorry. That could be challenging, right? Because the truck is owned by a company, but the driver, who knows who the driver might be necessarily? It gets more difficult for that, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's between the driver and the company,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
when we drive city vehicles, if we get a ticket, it'll go to the city, but then there's a log that says I was the one driving, and if
Right.
I got the ticket, then it's my ticket to pay. So, the idea is we can only go to whoever owns the license plate,
Mhm.
and then they have to figure out how to make sure that they, as a company, are in compliance.
Right. Thanks. Sorry, Stephanie.
No worries. There was a similar question. What are the post-weigh in motion enforcement site-specific load factors now? What are they now?
They're more similar to what the code requires. They actually, in a couple of places, dropped for a bit, but obviously we're not going to go below what the ASTRO code requires. So it's 1.75 and 1.35. So aligning with the code requirements.
Thank you. Question, has FHWA been involved in the handbook updates? And then a follow-up, is the handbook being written with an eye to national standardization?
Yes, very much so. So the handbook is a national standard, which is why we are trying to get it updated, because it automatically, by the fact that it's a NIST, which is National Institute of Specifications Technology, something like that. But they basically create this, everything they do is national. They're a federal agency, weirdly sitting under Department of Commerce. But for whatever reason, they are the ones who make sure that all of the technology that is in use has a standard for testing, meets whatever requirements, and so on. So they are the technical reviewers of the handbook, but each of the states gets to vote on it. So that is what the NIST handbook effort is, and we do want a national standard. FSWA, and this is where it gets weird, because FSWA sits out, this is a Department of Commerce effort. The voters are each state, and then there's FSWA. So it's a little disjointed. Again, the broken telephone that we've been playing, but we are working closely with a handful of folks at FHWA who, in their role to the level that they can support us, they do.
Thank you. Also, just a suggestion to note that the schedule for the next votes of the Department of Agriculture, just to state that, might help enable our MPO members and stakeholders to prioritize.
Good
I
point,
can
good point. So
I
the
can put that in the
interim,
chat as well if you like.
yes, I will look it up and drop it in. But so the interim meeting takes place in January. It actually is the same time as TRB for those of you who are looking at the dates. And that's where all of the states come together and decide whether they should move forward with this item. And then the actual vote takes place in July. And one of the tricky things is each state has to have their representative present physically to be able to vote. And one of the challenges we have is there are wonderful supportive states, they never send their rep out. And so even though they're supportive, if they don't show up, we don't get their votes. So not only they need to support, they need to show up in July and hit the button. So I'll look up that information and drop it and pass it on to you in a chat.
Thank you so much. Just a couple of follow-up questions. Do we think drivers are overloading their trucks or their companies?
Well, I mean, that's hard for me to say. I imagine it's a little bit of both. Everybody is, trying to do things in a competitive marketplace. It is difficult to get around the city. So if I can do something in one run instead of two runs, it saves me time, saves me money. Sometimes people are just not recognizing that if I can put X amount of sand in the thing, it's not the same as putting X amount of aggregate. And that's not the same as putting a bunch of hay in the truck, right?
Yeah.
Volume does not equal weight. And so sometimes there is a lack of understanding. So there's a lot to it. Oh, Roy, helpfully is putting the link in the chat. So
Thank
thanks, Roy.
you. Another question, has this preservation of infrastructure through enforcement changed the timeline or the urgency for the structural rehabilitation of the BQE?
We're keeping an eye on it. I mean, some of you might know that we're currently doing work on the BQE, right? We're doing some repairs that we started on Columbia Heights, one of the overpasses, and we'll be doing one of the bridges off this stretch this summer. The deck needs to be replaced. So while it helps, it does not eliminate the need. Like some years may move into the future. It is just did we buy 3 years here instead of 5 years? It's not as if the structure isn't already 70 years old and didn't take a beating all this time, right? So it's not a magic potion. It just gives us a little bit of more time. But the other half of the equation, like I said, is capacity. So you can help yourself by making the demand within control, but the capacity is the capacity. And so to the extent that there has been corrosion and loss of steel and so on, we can't put that back, right? So that has its own timeline. So we always look at the two things together and see what action we need to take. And so we're continuously monitoring that.
Right, thank you. There's just an FYI comment that other states are currently considering or actually pursuing weigh in motion direct enforcement. And then adding that a national standard will help reduce confusion, it'll ensure consistency and help other states create legislation, even if only for a specific site, such as a struggling bridge.
Correct. So New Jersey is looking at trying to get their legislation. I don't know what the current state of it is, but they're interested. Others have spoken about it, but I don't know of other states that are actively pursuing.
Thank you. Some more follow-up questions about overweight truck violations. If an overweight truck gets a violation, is that violation for being overweight in general or for being overweight on that specific portion of the roadway, like the BEQE Central, according to the law?
They're overweight in general, right? So we didn't create a new legal limit. The legal limit is the same that it's always been. All we're doing with the WIM is that if you are traveling above 10% legal limit on this section of BQE, then we will issue this violation using the WIM system. But if they go off BQE and they're somewhere else, they're still overweight. Now, certain areas allow permitted vehicles, and you could have the annual permit or whatever to be there. And that's a different set of rules, but then you need a permit. If you have no permit, then the legal limit is the legal limit.
And then do registered owners have any potential liability for negatively impacting the roadways leading to and from the bridge?
Not currently, just the 650 fine. You know, I mean, there's also the safety implications. Heavier truck takes longer to come to a stop. So, you know, just as all of us as roadway users, we should care about this, not just as bridge owners. That if a truck has to come to a stop, there have actually been incidents where the tires blew out or the brakes burned out, but the truck couldn't stop because it was so heavy and it was on a downhill or whatever. So it's not just a matter of infrastructure. And the other part of it is when PD or highway patrol, when they are busy dealing with a truck and they are going through the whole 20-point inspection or whatever that they have to do, they're not doing other enforcement activities that they should be doing, right? So all of that comes into the mix.
Thank you. And we just got a message from Mr. Ukegbu about who's responsible for overloading. He says, I can help with the answer regarding who is responsible for the overloading. According to TANY, the Truck Association in New York, they believe that it is the contractors that mostly overload, not the drivers. We have plans for outreach, the DOT has plans for outreach to the General Contractors Association, etc. There's also an issue that during the first run at the start of the day, trucks are generally compliant with their loads, but repeat trips during the day are often out of skew due to the absence of weight stations at all job sites.
Yeah, the weight station question is definitely something that we've been thinking about too, because it is a challenge. Even when we want to do our certification, finding locations where we can weigh our trucks can be a challenge. So that is a fair question. I have ideas that I will feed our legislative folks and others that, you know, in terms of what we should do, you know, if you have a massive construction site that is billions of dollars, maybe have them throw in a WIM sensor on the truck access point and say, guys, you got to be compliant. That's part of your job. I mean, I would like that, but that's just me.
Thank you. And Adam, I think that is all the chat questions for right now.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a few more coming. So that was really great. Thank you, Stephanie. So yeah, I did have a few questions of my own. I guess I was kind of curious. Well, first, actually, I was going to comment about how important it would be to get New Jersey signed on for this, because so many of the trucks that are coming through the BQE are coming from New Jersey. So in addition to preserving New Jersey's own infrastructure and safety, improving safety there, it would assist here too. So fingers crossed that does move forward. I was curious what the industry feedback was before this was being put forward, and then since it's been in place. Was there a lot of pushback from from TANY or others, or were they generally understanding of what was going on and what needed to be done?
They've actually been very supportive. I mean, you know, most of them want a fair play, right? So you don't want the truckers that are being compliant or trucking companies that are compliant to lose out because others feel like, hey, no one's going to catch me, so I can fill up my truck to the brim. So for the most part, they agree that it should be fair and everybody should try to follow the legal limits. There's obviously some, you know, discussions around permits and who has permit and who's able to get permits and all of those, which are bigger policy discussions that have been brought up. In the case of BQE, because it was a specific location where we were not even allowing any permitted vehicle, that was sort of not critical, right? It didn't matter. If you're over 80,000, you don't belong on this stretch of BQE. So it was more simplified conversation.
Okay, all right, that's good. Thank you. I had a question about so I think you said there was roughly a 10% trucks mix on this section of the BQE. Did that change at all with the institution of enforcement? Did the number go perhaps higher because there had to be more trucks that were smaller weight, or did was there potential diversions, and so therefore the number went down? I don't know if you saw any change at all in the percent trucks mix.
Not really. The percent
Okay.
truck mix has stayed pretty steady. And I think this kind of is one of those where we were already at capacity. So anytime one truck is taking a different route, there's another one that takes its spot. So nothing really changes.
Great point. Great point. Thank you. I was curious what the lift was like in terms of convincing folks of the accuracy of the camera enforcement. I think that the folks at State DOT preceded this system maybe by a couple of years in terms of automated work zone enforcement. So maybe that helped. But I also know that there were always some questions about the accuracy of the cameras and also maybe I guess being, security, those kinds of questions. I don't know if you saw any of those issues when you were putting this together.
No, because I think in the city, we do red light camera and bus lane and all those for a long time. The one key difference is we're not identifying the violation via camera in this case. The violation is identified by the WIM sensors,
Right.
right? So there really wasn't anything to complain about. The only thing the camera is doing is identifying the license plate so we can track down the actual owner of the vehicle. So it has nothing, the identification of violation is happening on the sensor. And once we show that, we're giving 10% pass, it really was kind of difficult for anybody to argue,
Right.
even if we were off, like,
Yeah.
10% is a pretty big grace zone.
Okay. And the word I was trying to think of before was privacy, but as you point out, privacy is not an issue because it's really about the weight. It's not about the camera's only used once the weight is too high.
Correct.
Any issues? Have you seeing any trucks maybe using more methods to obscure license plates? I know this is perhaps a challenge for the folks doing congestion pricing as well. Anything that you're seeing there, or has that not really been an issue? Fingers crossed.
Not much of an issue. On occasion, we'll see a truck that has, there's a license plate, and then they put some kind of a thing in the middle of the license plate, and so now you can't see what the plate number is or something like that. But it's not that frequent. What we've heard more so on the red light camera and speed cameras that they see more issues, not so much on the trucks.
I have one last one, and then we might have some other questions coming in. I'm not sure, but I was curious if if New York City DOT has been working with the elected officials, specifically the ones in Washington, to maybe try and make the case for changing this the NIST code. Is that something, or is it just, it doesn't even matter if, Senator Schumer or Senator Gillibrand or anybody, makes the case because the states still have to press that button. So don't know if it even matters, but curious.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Maybe senator to senator, they can have conversations and tell them to go take it back to their own states. I don't know. But ultimately, it comes down to each state's Department of Agriculture has to be present and press that button. So what we've tried to do is talk to our counterparts at the DOTs and say, you guys have the same problem we have. Why don't you go up your chain and bring it down to Department of Ag? And a lot of times that conversation just keeps breaking down. And so we keep trying to find different ways to reach those people. I went to ASTRO annual conference 2 years ago, and bar none, every single state DOT official was like, heck yeah, I want this. And then it died. Half of them never talked to anybody. So we're trying to bridge that gap. And I should note CVSA came in support. So that is the state highway officials, like the safety professionals and a lot of the trucking alliances and so on. So they together also came out publicly and said this makes sense. We had ASCE technology committee also come out in support. So we've had some of these national entities support, but because it has to then trickle down to that particular director who shows up on that day, that's where the conversation seems to die.
Alas. All right. Thank you, Tommy. I think I saw a couple other items pop up in the chat, Stephanie?
Yep, there's just one more chat question. Can
Okay.
you share any conversations regarding this issue and BEV trucks? How is that being messaged to the industry?
The
And a
EV
thank you.
truck question is a good question. One of the things we've had conversations around here as well is that, unfortunately, while EV is a great initiative, it does add weight to the truck. And we very much are concerned that, most truck companies are not going to reduce the loads that they need to carry to make up for what they lost in the in the battery weight. And so that's going to potentially result in higher overweight vehicles on the structure. We already see cars getting so much heavier, and then other issues that come from batteries and so on. So that is a conversation we're having. Other than educating everyone on why the truck limit, weight limit matters, there's not a whole lot we can do from our side, but it is something that I guess as asset owners or policymakers, we need to be cognizant of.
Thank you so much. Adam, that is the last of the chat questions for now. I just put the APA credit information in the chat for those who would like to. This session is being offered for one.
Thanks, Stephanie. I did have one last question. Sorry. I did have one last question. It's a math question. So you said you need 27 votes. Is that suggests that there's more than 50 states that are voting? Are there other
Yes.
entities?
No, all 50 states get a vote, and so does, like, Puerto Rico gets to have its own vote, and so on, and some
Okay.
of the territories. But yeah, we need 27 of them to vote in support, and at this point, we're at maybe somewhere between 12 and 15.
Oh boy.
So we have ways to go,
Yeah.
and there are at least 5, 6 states who would support, but they don't show up. So it's making it very difficult to get over that limit. Now, I am going to be at TRB, and that hopefully is another conversation that will start, and working with the vendors and a lot of others. We're trying to get the word out and really make a push, but this is part of that effort.
They should be able to give their proxy to a state that's attending so they can vote for them.
Yes.
Oh, well, okay. I don't know. Was there something else in the chat, Stephanie?
There
or we're
was
done?
one more question just came in. Yep. Have a
Okay.
commodity-based exception or weight limit variations, such as like the 90,000 limit variance in Georgia for certain commodities. How does that play into this discussion? The technical like exceptions and also the political, since agricultural lobbies might seek to make the voting difficult. Let me know if you need me to reread that.
No, I've heard portions of that conversation along the way, and there's two things, right? Whatever limit you want to set, you need to enforce it. So that's number one. If you set a 90,000 limit, there'll be 110,000 pound truck driving. So you want to set 90, great, enforce the 90. So that the number of that limit doesn't change the need for enforcement. So we need to separate those two. The other thing I've heard from other states, like we had a long chat with someone in Wisconsin who gets super heavy trucks at certain times of the year from the agriculture product. And he said the same thing. He's like, I'm fine with that. I will issue the permit to those trucks for a certain time of the year or whatever it is, but I need to be able to control the rest of the people who just pass through because they can, and I don't have enough people to enforce the limits that exist. And so all of those are policy decisions. All I can say is please don't leave the bridge and the transportation people out of that conversation. Funnily enough, I think it was Georgia, but it might have been another state that just was discussing raising the legal weight limits. They didn't talk to any of their state DOT. And, so then the state DOT is freaking out, going like, what do you mean you're raising all the limits? So we need to be part of that conversation, and there's ways around it. We can certainly make it, like one of the things WIM is not great for at speed is tankers, because liquids can slosh around and it can throw off the weight. So we simply look at the picture and say, oh, this is a tanker. This violation is not going out. I mean, it's as simple as that. If you know that there's a particular kind of vehicle or a particular kind of load that shouldn't be in violation, then you just build it into your system. Whatever policy you need to write, you can write it into your program, but you need to still enforce whatever limit it is that you need to set.
Thank you so much. And those are all the questions so far.
All right. Well, I probably could come up with a couple more, but I think we've heard plenty from Tom V, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you again for all this great information. Thank you, everyone, for all the great questions. Stephanie and Maura and Fidel and the team here at NYMTC really appreciate all your great help. And hopefully we'll see everybody at our next brown bag event. So thank you again, Tanvi. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the holidays
Thanks,
and have a great
everyone.
afternoon.
Thanks everyone for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye.